At my best friend's milestone birthday trip, someone intentionally laced my food to prove I was faking my fatal autoimmune disease. I've been strictly terrified of cross-contamination since Lena found me hemorrhaging on my apartment floor 4 years ago, in Seattle. We had just signed a lease together, and she was supposed to be at a marketing seminar. Instead, she forgot her laptop, came home, and found me unconscious, my body shutting down from severe celiac complications. The ER doctor told her that if she had been an hour later, my organs would have failed. Rebuilding my health was a brutal nightmare, but Lena was my absolute anchor. When she started her tech company 2 years ago and became wildly successful, I was paranoid our dynamic would shift. Instead, she bought separate cookware for our kitchen, memorized every hidden additive on grocery labels, and fiercely defended my dietary boundaries. When Lena asked me to co-host her lavish 30th birthday retreat, I hesitated. I asked her if she really wanted the girl with the medical baggage ruining the vibe. She hugged me tight and said my presence was the only gift she cared about. The celebration was going flawlessly at a stunning $4,500 a night ski lodge in Aspen, Colorado. That is, until Lena's bitter older cousin, Petra, arrived on Thursday. Petra had always resented our bond. On the second night, she trapped me by the stone fireplace. She looked me up and down and sneered about how convenient it was that my invisible illness required me to be pampered at luxury resorts on Lena's dime. I tried to walk away, calmly stating my condition nearly killed me. Petra just scoffed and rolled her eyes. On Saturday night, Lena hired a private chef to prepare a multi-course Italian feast. I sat safely distanced from the fresh focaccia bread. The chef had prepared a customized, completely isolated portion of gluten-free truffle ravioli, just for me. But as I pulled the bowl closer, I noticed the garnish looked identical to the standard plates. Years of medical trauma have made me hopelessly paranoid. I reached into my purse, pulled out my portable NEMA sensor, a small chemistry device that detects microscopic gluten, and dropped a pea-sized sample into the capsule. 90 seconds later, the device vibrated and flashed a solid, angry red. High levels detected. My blood ran cold. Then I heard a sharp laugh from the kitchen doorway. Petra was standing there, her phone pointed directly at me, recording. I knew it, she beamed triumphantly. A real sick person would have just eaten it without doing a science experiment. You're just a dramatic hypochondriac performing for Lena. My hand started shaking. I held up the blinking sensor. This is full of pure wheat. If I swallow it, I end up in the ICU with internal bleeding. Petra stepped forward, looking smug. Oh please, I swapped your plate with mine. It's perfectly safe. Prove you're not faking. Take one bite. Before I could respond, the private chef walked out of the pantry, took one look at the red sensor, and his face drained of color. Who touched that plate? He demanded. Lena rushed into the dining room. The chef frantically explained that the regular ravioli wasn't just wheat. It was finished with a toasted walnut oil glaze. Petra rolled her eyes at the chaos. You people are insane. To prove her point, she snatched the tainted bowl, scooped up a massive spoonful, and swallowed it whole. She didn't know about the walnut oil, but I knew Petra had a lethal tree nut allergy. Within 20 seconds, Petra's triumphant smirk vanished. She dropped the spoon. Her hands flew to her throat as a terrible wheezing gasp escaped her lips. Her face flushed a deep, violent purple, and she collapsed against the dining chair, full anaphylaxis setting in rapidly. While Lena screamed and the chef scrambled to call 911, I didn't hesitate. I sprinted to my emergency medical bag, ripped open the zipper, and pulled out my backup EpiPen. I dropped to the floor beside the woman who had just tried to poison me, jammed the needle into her outer thigh, and held it there while she gasped for air. The adrenaline hit her system, and for a second, her eyes bugged out, wide and bloodshot, fixed on mine. The wheezing didn't stop immediately, but the frantic clawing motion at her neck slowed down. I kept my weight on her leg, making sure the needle stayed exactly where it needed to be for the full 10 count. Around us, the lodge had descended into a vacuum of noise. Lena was on the phone with the dispatcher, her voice high and cracking, repeating the address over and over. The chef was white as a sheet, backing away into the kitchen counter, his hands shaking so hard he knocked over a stack of appetizer plates. The sound of ceramic shattering on the slate floor was the only thing that broke the spell. I called 911, Lena gasped, dropping to her knees on the other side of Petra. They're 10 minutes out, maybe 15 with the snow. Is she breathing? Barely, I said. My own heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise. I pulled the EpiPen away and checked the time on my watch, 8:42 p.m. We need to keep her upright. Lena, get a pillow. Not too soft, we need her head supported. Petra's skin was still a terrifying mottled color, but the violent purple was receding into a puffy, inflamed red. Her lips were swollen to twice their size. She looked at me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the malice was gone. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. She tried to speak, but only a wet, gargling sound came out. Don't talk, I told her. My voice was surprisingly steady, the kind of calm that only comes when you've spent years navigating your own body's betrayals. Just breathe. Focus on me. The next 20 minutes felt like 3 hours. The chef, a man named Marco, who had been so proud of his safe kitchen protocols, was pacing the hallway, muttering to himself about lawsuits and cross-contamination. I didn't have the energy to deal with him yet. My eyes were locked on Petra. I watched the rise and fall of her chest, counting the seconds between each shallow, whistling breath. Every time her eyes started to roll back, I'd squeeze her hand, the same hand that had been holding a phone to record my fake illness only minutes before. When the paramedics finally burst through the heavy oak doors, the cold air they brought with them felt like a slap. They took over instantly, professional and efficient, sliding Petra onto a gurney. One of them asked about the medication administered. I handed him the spent EpiPen. Good call, he said, glancing at me. She wouldn't have made it to the driveway without this. As they wheeled her out into the freezing Aspen night, the lodge fell into a sickening silence. The smell of the truffle ravioli, the meal that was supposed to be a celebration, was still heavy in the air, cloying and disgusting. Lena stood by the window, watching the ambulance lights recede down the winding mountain road. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She turned around, and the expression on her face wasn't relief. It was a cold, hard fury I'd never never seen directed at anyone in her family before. She swapped the plates, Lena said. It wasn't a question. She looked at the table, at the discarded spoon Petra had used. She actually did it. She tried to make you eat weed on purpose. She didn't believe me, Lena, I said, finally letting myself sink into a chair. The post-adrenaline crash was starting. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. She thought it was a game. She thought I was using you. Lena walked over to the table and picked up the NEMA sensor. It was still sitting there. The red light dimmed, but the gluten-found message still clear on the tiny screen. She stared at it for a long time. She knew about your Seattle trip, Lena whispered. I told her. I told the whole family how I found you. I told them you almost died. People don't believe what they can't see, I said. I looked at the kitchen. Marco was leaning against the island, his head in his hands. Lena, the chef, he's going to be panicking. He thinks he's liable. He is liable, Lena snapped, her voice regaining its edge. But not for the reasons he thinks. He followed my instructions. He had a sterile station. The only reason there was walnut oil in that bowl is because Petra moved it. She contaminated your safe meal with her own deadly one. The irony was heavy enough to choke on. If Petra hadn't been so obsessed with catching me in a lie, she would have sat at the other end of the table and eaten her own walnut-glazed pasta without a second thought. Her attempt to poison me was the only thing that put the poison in her own mouth. By midnight, the rest of the guests had retreated to their rooms. The party was dead. Lena and I were sitting on the oversized leather sofa, a single lamp turned on. She had a glass of wine she hadn't touched. I had a bottle of water I was gripping like a lifeline. The hospital called, Lena said, checking her phone. She's stable. They're keeping her overnight for observation because of the secondary reaction risk. Her mom is flying in tomorrow morning. How is her mom? I asked. I'd met Petra's mother, Aunt Sarah, at a few weddings. She was just as high-strung as Petra, but usually more passive-aggressive than openly hostile. Furious, Lena said. At me, at the lodge, at the chef. She's already talking about suing the catering company. She doesn't know? I haven't told her the full story yet, Lena admitted, rubbing her temples. I just told her there was an accidental ingestion and Petra is in the ICU. I didn't tell her that her daughter is a sociopath who tried to medical gaslight my best friend into a coma. I leaned my head back against the cushion. She's going to blame the kitchen. If she sues, Marco loses everything. His reputation, his business. And he actually did everything right. Lena looked at me, her eyes narrowing. You're worried about the chef? After what she did, I'm worried about the truth, I said. Because if I have to testify, I have to tell them I saw her swap the plates. And if I tell them that, the insurance company won't pay out a dime for her hospital stay. They'll call it intentional self-harm or gross negligence. Her family will be on the hook for a six-figure medevac and ICU bill. Lena was silent for a moment. The fire in the hearth was dying down, the embers clicking as they cooled. Good, she said finally. Let them pay. Maybe a bill that big will finally make them realize that an invisible doesn't mean imaginary. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Petra's family was the backbone of Lena's social circle in their hometown. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a grenade tossed into the middle of a family dynamic that was already strained by Lena's recent success. The next morning, the sun hit the snow with a blinding, aggressive brightness. I woke up to the sound of raised voices downstairs. I didn't even have to look at my phone to know that Aunt Sarah had arrived. I threw on a sweater and headed down the stairs. The great room was filled with the smell of expensive coffee and tension. Aunt Sarah was standing in the center of the room, her Chanel puffer jacket still on, gesturing wildly at Marco, who looked like he hadn't slept a wink. It's a simple nut allergy, Sarah was shouting. Every professional kitchen knows how to handle a nut allergy. This is negligence. This is a lawsuit. Lena was standing by the coffee bar, her arms crossed, watching the scene with a terrifyingly blank expression. She saw me on the stairs and tilted her head slightly. Sarah, Lena said, her voice cutting through the shouting like a knife. You should probably stop talking to the staff. Stop talking? Sarah turned on Lena, her face flushed. My daughter is laying in a hospital bed because of this man's incompetence. And you're defending him? On your birthday trip? I'm not defending his incompetence, Lena said calmly. She walked over to the dining table and picked up a small clear plastic bag. Inside was the phone Petra had been using to record me. I'm defending the facts. Petra wasn't served walnut oil. She stole it. Sarah froze. What are you talking about? She swapped the plates, I said, stepping off the last stair. My voice sounded thin in the large room, but it carried. She wanted to see if I would get sick from the fake plate she gave me. She didn't realize she was taking the one thing she couldn't have. Sarah looked at me, then back at Lena. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, followed immediately by a wall of maternal denial. That's ridiculous. Why would she do that? You're just trying to cover for your friend's illness again. You've always been obsessed with this diet of yours. It's not a diet, Sarah, Lena said. She held up Petra's phone, and we don't have to guess. Petra was recording. She wanted a video of her proving that my best friend is a liar. I'm guessing the video is still on here. The room went deathly quiet. Marco looked from Lena to Sarah, a tiny spark of hope returning to his eyes. Sarah's hand went to her throat, a gesture eerily similar to the one her daughter had made the night before. Give me that phone, Sarah demanded, reaching out. Lena stepped back, tucking the phone into her pocket. No, I think we'll keep this for the insurance adjusters, since you're so intent on suing. Lena, she's your cousin, Sarah pleaded, her voice dropping an octave. She made a mistake. She was just frustrated. You know how she's been struggling lately, seeing you do so well while she's still at that firm. She tried to poison my friend, Lena said. The blankness was gone now, replaced by a cold, vibrating rage. She didn't make a mistake. She made a plan. The only mistake she made was being too stupid to realize the chef followed my safety protocols for the sick girl better than she followed her own. Sarah looked at me, and for a second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she sneered. I hope you're happy. You've ruined this entire family. She turned and marched out of the lodge, the heavy doors slamming behind her. Marco exhaled a breath that sounded like a sob. Thank you, he whispered to Lena. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Lena said, her voice weary. Pack your things, Marco. I'll pay the full contract, plus a premium for the trouble. But I think this trip is over. As Marco hurried away, Lena turned to me. She looked exhausted. I'm sorry, she said. I wanted this to be perfect. I wanted you to feel safe. I did did feel safe, I said, walking over to her. Until I didn't. But you had my back, Lena. You always do. We spent the next few hours packing in silence. The other guests, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, made themselves scarce, slipping out to their rental cars with awkward waves. By noon, it was just the two of us and the vast empty lodge. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. I know you have the phone. If you show that video to anyone, I'll tell everyone you set me up. I'll tell them you knew about the walnut oil and let me eat it. I stared at the screen. The handwriting of the message, the tone, was unmistakably Petra. Even from a hospital bed, she was doubling down. I showed the screen to Lena. She read it, her jaw tightening. She doesn't get it, Lena whispered. She really doesn't get it. She thinks she can win, I said. She thinks if she makes it messy enough, we'll just go away to avoid the drama. Lena looked out at the mountains, the peaks jagged and white against the blue sky. She's right about one thing, she said. It is going to be messy. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Petra's phone. She didn't unlock it. She just held it for a moment, then looked at me. We're not going to the airport yet, Lena said. We're going to the hospital. I think it's time Petra and I had a conversation without her mother in the room. The drive to the hospital in Glenwood Springs was quiet. The roads were slick, the Jeep's tires crunching over patches of black ice. My mind was racing. I knew Petra. I'd known her since she was a teenager. She was the kind of person who viewed every interaction as a zero-sum game. For her to be right, someone else had to be wrong. For her to be the victim, someone else had to be the villain. When we walked into the ICU waiting area, the air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, probably down in the cafeteria or outside making more frantic phone calls. Lena checked in at the desk using her CEO voice, the one that didn't take no for an answer. Family only, the nurse said, looking at me. She's my sister's, Lena said, not even blinking. And we're here to see Petra Mills. The nurse sighed but buzzed us through. Petra was in a private room at the end of the hall. She looked terrible. Her face was still incredibly puffy, her eyes slits in a sea of inflamed skin. She had an IV in her arm and a monitor clipped to her finger, the steady beep 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 filling the small space. When she saw us, her eyes widened and she tried to sit up, wincing at the movement. Get out, she croaked. Her voice sounded like she'd swallowed broken glass. Lena didn't get out. She walked right up to the side of the bed and pulled the visitor's chair close. She sat down, crossed her legs, and placed Petra's phone on the rolling tray table. I got your text, Lena said. Petra looked at the phone, then at me. I meant it. You saw me. You let me do it. That's practically attempted murder. Actually, I said, stepping forward. I was the one who saved your life. The chef didn't have an EpiPen. Lena didn't have an EpiPen. If I hadn't been there, the hypochondriac with the medical baggage, you'd be in a body bag right now. Petra flinched. The beep on the monitor picked up speed. But let's talk about the video, Lena said, her voice deceptively soft. I watched it in the car. It's very high quality. You can see the exact moment you slide my plate toward yourself and push yours toward her. You can even hear you whispering to yourself. Let's see how sick she really gets. Petra's face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray. I was joking. It was a prank. A prank, Lena repeated. She leaned in closer. You tried to induce a medical crisis in a woman who almost died 4 years ago. You did it in a remote lodge, 40 minutes from the nearest hospital, during a snowstorm. In any jurisdiction, Petra, that's not a prank. That's aggravated assault. You wouldn't, Petra whispered. Family doesn't do that. Family doesn't try to kill family either, Lena snapped. But here we are. Lena picked up the phone again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your mother. You're going to tell her that the reaction was entirely your fault. You're going to tell her that the chef is blameless and that you will not be pursuing any legal action against him, the lodge, or anyone else. And then, you're going to pay for this entire trip. Every dime. Petra let out a harsh, wet laugh. I don't have that kind of money, Lena. I'm not you. Then you'd better start a payment plan, Lena said. Because if I hear one more word about faking it, or if you ever contact her again, this video goes to the police. And I'll make sure the insurance company sees it too. I wonder how your law firm will feel about a junior associate with an assault charge. The silence in the room was heavy. Petra looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, cornered kind of hatred. She knew she was beaten, but the venom was still there, simmering just under the surface. You think you're so much better than me, Petra hissed at me, just because she feels sorry for you. I looked at her, and for the first times in years, I didn't feel the need to defend my health. I didn't feel the need to explain the hospital stays, the blood tests, or the fear. I don't care what you think, Petra, I said. I'm just glad I brought my science experiment to dinner. It saved me from you, and it saved you from yourself. We walked out of the room without waiting for a response. As the heavy door swung shut, the beep 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 of the monitor was the last thing I heard. In the hallway, Lena leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. I think I'm going to be sick, she whispered. The adrenaline's wearing off, I said, putting an arm around her. Let's get out of here. Let's go home. But as we walked toward the exit, I saw Aunt Sarah stepping out of the elevator. She saw us and her face hardened into a mask of pure spite. She didn't say a word, just marched past us toward Petra's room. I had a feeling this wasn't the end of it. The video was a powerful shield, but in a family like Lena's, secrets were currency, and Sarah wasn't the type to go bankrupt quietly. When we got back to the Jeep, there was a message waiting on Lena's dashboard screen. It was an email notification from her office. The subject line was, "Her security breach, internal leak inquiry." Lena stared at the screen, her brow furrowed. That's weird. Why is HR emailing me on a Sunday? She opened the email. As she read, the color drained from her face again. What is it? I asked, a pit forming in my stomach. It's an anonymous tip, Lena said, her voice trembling. Someone sent a file to the board of directors. It's a series of whistleblower allegations claiming I've been embezzling company funds to pay for personal medical expenses for a non-employee. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Petra, I whispered. She must have sent it before we even got to the hospital, Lena said. She knew I had the phone. She knew I'd come for her. This was her backup plan. The medical baggage she'd promised wouldn't ruin the vibe had just become a weapon used to dismantle her entire life's work. We need to call your lawyer, I said, my voice urgent. No, Lena said, looking back at the hospital entrance. The lawyer can wait. First, I need to know exactly how Petra got her hands on my private medical logs, because those files weren't on my work computer. They were in the safe at our apartment. The realization hit us both at the same time. The lodge, the dinner, the prank, it was all a distraction. While we were focused on the plate, someone else had been focused on the paperwork. Lena started the engine, her hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles were white. "We're not going to the airport," she said, her voice cold and focused. "We're going back to Seattle now." The drive back through the mountains felt different. The beauty of the snow was gone, replaced by a sense of encroaching shadows. Every car that pulled out behind us felt like a threat. Every buzz of the phone felt like another stone being pulled from the foundation of the life we'd built. "She couldn't have done it alone," I said, staring out the window at the passing pines. "Petra was in Aspen the whole time. Who was in Seattle?" Lena didn't answer. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the road, but I saw the way her gaze flickered to the rearview mirror. "Lena? My brother," she said quietly. "Mark. He was supposed to be watching the apartment while we were gone. He said he wanted a quiet weekend away from his kids." Mark, the golden boy of the family who had spent the last 3 years finding himself on Lena's payroll. The brother who always laughed the loudest at my special meals. "He has the code to the safe," Lena continued. "He's the only one who does, in case of an emergency." The emergency had been manufactured from the start. The birthday trip wasn't a celebration. It was an extraction. They'd gotten us out of the city, out of the apartment, and into a position where we were vulnerable. As we hit the highway, the first drops of rain began to fall, turning the snow into a gray, slushy mess. "Why would he do it?" I asked. "You've given him everything." "Maybe that's the problem," Lena said. "When you give someone everything, they start to think they're entitled to the rest." My phone buzzed again. It was an alert from my bank. "Large transaction detected. Please verify." I opened the app. My heart stopped. A transfer of $50,000 had been initiated from my savings account, the money I'd painstakingly saved for my disability settlement years ago. The destination was an offshore account I didn't recognize. "Lena," I choked out, showing her the screen. "They're not just going after your company. They're draining me too." The betrayal felt worse than the walnut oil. That money was my safety net. It was the only reason I wasn't terrified of the next flare-up. Lena pulled the car onto the shoulder of the highway, the gravel spraying against the underside of the Jeep. She didn't say anything for a long minute. She just sat there, the rain drumming on the roof, her breath fogging up the windshield. "They think you're the weak link," Lena said, her voice dropping into a register I'd never heard before. "They think because you're sick, you're easy to break. They think if they take your money and ruin my reputation, we'll just crawl away and be grateful they didn't do more." She turned to look at me, and for a second, the light in her eyes was terrifying. "But they forgot one thing," she said. "I've spent the last 4 years learning how to fight for your life. I think it's time I started fighting for mine." She put the car back into gear and floored it. We weren't just going home. We were going to war. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was tactical. I started going through my phone, documenting every text, every timestamp, every interaction with Petra and Mark over the last 6 months. My paranoid habit of keeping records was suddenly the most valuable thing I owned. "The transfer," Lena said, not looking away from the road. "Call the bank. Tell them it's fraud. Don't mention the family yet. Just get the hold placed." I spent the next hour on the phone with a series of increasingly skeptical bank representatives. Every time I had to explain my identity, I felt the familiar sting of having to prove I was real, but I pushed through it. By the time we crossed the state line, the funds were frozen, pending a police report. "Step 1, I muttered, hanging up. "Step 2 is the apartment," Lena said. "If Mark is still there, he's going to try to play the victim. He's going to say he was hacked, or that Petra took his keys. We can't let him see us coming." We didn't go to our usual parking spot. Lena pulled into a public garage 3 blocks away. We walked through the rain, our hoods up, 2 shadows moving through the Sunday evening crowds. My lungs were burning. The cold air was never good for my system, but I ignored the ache. When we reached the building, the lobby was quiet. The doorman, a guy named Oscar who usually joked with us, was busy on the phone. We slipped past the desk and took the service elevator. Outside our door, Lena paused. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, handheld digital recorder. She turned it on and tucked it into her sleeve. She swiped her key card. The lock clicked, and we stepped inside. The apartment was dark, except for the glow of the city lights coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It smelled of expensive cigars, Mark's signature scent. "Mark?" Lena called out, her voice steady. There was a scuffle from the direction of the study. A light flickered on. Mark stepped out, holding a glass of scotch. He looked rumpled, like he'd been sleeping in his clothes, but he didn't look surprised. "Hey sis," he said, his voice smooth. "You're back early. How was the trip? Did the birthday girl have fun?" "Where's the file, Mark?" Lena asked, walking straight toward him. She didn't bother with the pleasantries. Mark feigned confusion, a slow smirk spreading across his face. "File? I don't know what you're talking about. I've just been hanging out, keeping the place warm. Though I have to say, your friend's medical safe is surprisingly heavy." He pointed toward the study. The safe, the one that held my medical records, our lease agreement, and Lena's secondary company keys, was sitting in the middle of the rug. It hadn't been cracked. It had been professionally drilled. "You're a thief," I said, stepping out from behind Lena. Mark laughed. "I'm a consultant, remember? And as a consultant, I felt it was my duty to investigate some inconsistencies in the company's charitable spending. It's amazing what you find when you look at the fine print of your healthcare premiums, Lena. All those specialist visits? The board is going to have a field day." "I paid for those out of my personal dividends," Lena said. "Every single one. And I have the tax records to prove it." "Maybe you do," Mark said, taking a sip of his drink. "But by the time you prove it, the stock will have plummeted, the board will have voted you out, and I'll be sitting in your chair as the stable alternative." The family already agreed. "We're tired of the Lena and her sick friend show. It's bad for the brand." I looked at the safe, then back at Mark. He was so confident, so sure that he'd already won. "The family agreed?" Lena asked. "Even your mom?" "Especially Mom," Mark said. "She's the one who suggested the Aspen trip. A little stress test for the invalid and a clear house for me. It was a perfect plan." Lena's hand moved in her sleeve, adjusting the recorder. "And Petra? Was the walnut oil part of the plan too?" Mark's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "Petra's a loose cannon. She has her own grudges. But hey, it worked out, didn't it? She's the victim now. The poor cousin who was poisoned at your party. She wasn't poisoned, Mark, I said. She tried to poison me, and I saved her life. Mark rolled his eyes. Yeah. Save the hero speech for the jury. Right now, you two need to pack. I've already contacted the landlord. Since the whistleblower report includes allegations of using the apartment for illegal corporate tax shelters, the lease is being terminated immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Our keys. I'll give you an hour, Mark said. After that, I call security. Lena didn't move. She just looked at him, a strange, sad smile touching her lips. You really think it's that easy, don't you? You think you can just drill a safe and take a life? I didn't take it, Mark said. I'm just reclaiming it for the people who actually built this family. Then you should have looked at the files more closely, Lena said. She walked over to the safe and knelt beside it. She reached into the hole Mark had drilled and pulled out a small black USB drive that had been taped to the underside of the top panel. It was so small he'd missed it in his rush to grab the paper files. What is that? Mark asked, his voice losing its edge. This, Lena said, holding it up, is the log of every consulting fee I've paid you over the last 3 years, along with the photos of the business meetings you claim to be attending, which were actually just you and your friends at the casino in Vegas. I kept them as leverage, Mark, just in case you ever decided you wanted the chair. Mark's face went white. He put his drink down on the table, his hand shaking. You're bluffing. Try me, Lena said. I'll send this to the board 5 minutes after I leave this room. And then I'll call your wife and tell her exactly where that $20,000 marketing budget went last summer. I'm sure she'll love the pictures of the blonde in the penthouse. The silence that followed was different than the one in the hospital. This one was sharp. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Mark looked at the USB drive, then at Lena, then at me. The golden boy was gone. In his place was a small, desperate man who had gambled everything on a lie. Lena, wait, he stammered. We can talk about this. The family, we can fix this. The family is dead to me, Lena said. She stood up and looked around the apartment, our home. And you're right about one thing. We are leaving. But we're not leaving because you told us to. We're leaving because this place smells like you. She looked at me. Get your bag, just the essentials. We can replace the rest. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my medical kit, my laptop, and a few changes of clothes. As I passed Mark, he didn't even look at me. He was staring at the floor, his world crumbling in real time. We walked out of the apartment and back into the rain. We didn't look back. As we got into the Jeep, Lena finally let out a long, shaky breath. She took the recorder out of her sleeve and hit stop. Did you get it? I asked. Every word, she said. The confession about the safe, the plan with the mom, the embezzlement talk. It's all there. What now? Lena looked at the dark windows of our apartment building. Now we go to a hotel. And tomorrow morning, I'm calling a board meeting. But first, she pulled out her phone and opened a contact I hadn't seen her use in years. It was her father's private investigator. I want to know where Petra's mother is staying, Lena said into the phone. And I want a full audit of her charity foundation. If they want to talk about tax shelters, let's give them something to talk about. She hung up and looked at me. Are you okay? Do you need to eat? Your levels. I'm fine, Lena, I said, and for the first time in years, I actually meant it. My stomach was in knots, and my joints were starting to throb from the cold, but I felt more alive than I had since that day in Seattle. I'm not the one who's breaking. We checked into a small, quiet hotel on the outskirts of the city. We spent the night huddled over our laptops, building a counter-offensive that would make Petra's whistleblower report look like a grade school essay. By 4 a.m., we had a timeline, we had the evidence, and we had the motivation. As the sun began to rise over the sound, I looked at the NEMA sensor sitting on the nightstand. It was still there, a reminder of the dinner that had changed everything. The battle for Lena's company was just beginning. The family war was only in its first skirmish. But as I watched Lena sleep, her face finally relaxed for the first time in days. I knew one thing for certain. They had tried to use my weakness to destroy her. But in the end, it was our shared strength that was going to destroy them. The next morning, the hotel room felt like a command center. Lena was already on her 3rd cup of coffee, her phone glued to her ear. She was talking to her chief operating officer, a woman named Diane, who had been with her since the beginning. No, Diane, don't stall, Lena said, her voice crisp. Tell the board I'll be there at 10. And tell them to make sure the legal counsel is present. I have a disclosure of my own to make. She hung up and looked at me. Diane says the board is spooked. Mark's anonymous tip was backed up by some doctored spreadsheets that make it look like I've been funneling millions into a shell company. Can we disprove it? I asked. Easily, Lena said. But the damage to the brand is what they're worried about. A tech company built on transparency and ethics can't afford a CEO caught in a family embezzlement scandal. Unless the CEO is the one who uncovers it, I said. Lena nodded. Exactly. We arrived at the corporate headquarters at 9:55 a.m. The lobby was swarming with people, but the atmosphere was hushed. When we stepped into the elevator, the other employees looked away, their eyes darting nervously. It was the Walking Dead treatment. They thought Lena was already gone. The boardroom was on the 42nd floor, a glass-walled box that overlooked the harbor. When we walked in, the 10 members of the board were already seated. At the far end of the table, looking smug in a tailored suit, was Mark. Beside him was a man I recognized as the family's longtime attorney, Mr. Henderson. Lena, the chairman, a gray-haired man named Arthur, said, "We'd expect you to bring guests." She's not a guest, Arthur, Lena said, taking her seat at the head of the table. I sat in the chair directly behind her. She's the primary witness in the fraud investigation I'm about to open. Mark's smirk didn't waver. Lena, don't make this harder than it has to be. We've seen the files. We know about the medical payments. You mean the payments I made from my post-tax personal accounts? Lena asked, sliding a thick folder across the table. The ones that are clearly documented in these bank statements? The ones that have absolutely nothing to do with company funds? Arthur opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. Henderson leaned in to look as well. These look legitimate, Arthur muttered. They are, Lena said. Now let's talk about the shell company Mark mentioned in his tip. She pulled out a second folder. This one was thinner, but the tension in the room spiked as she opened it. It turns out there is a shell company, Lena said, looking directly at Mark. It's called Summit Consulting. It was registered 18 months ago, and while it has no employees and no office, it has received over $400,000 in advisory fees from this firm. Fees that were authorized by the head of business development. She paused, letting the words sink in. That's your department, isn't it, Mark? Mark's face went from smug to a blotchy, panicked red. That's a legitimate vendor. They provide market analysis. Market analysis from a casino in Macau? Lena asked. Because that's where the wire transfers ended up. I have the IP logs from the Summit Consulting portal. They all originate from the same laptop. The one Mark is currently holding. The room went silent. I watched Arthur's face go from confusion to cold, hard realization. He looked at Mark, then back at Lena. Is this true? Arthur asked. I can explain, Mark stammered. He doesn't have to, Lena said. She pulled the digital recorder from her bag and set it on the table. He already explained it to me last night, in my apartment, while he was standing next to a safe he'd illegally drilled into. She hit play. Mark's voice filled the room. I'll be sitting in your chair as the stable alternative. The family already agreed. The recording played for 3 minutes. It captured the confession, the threats, and the sheer, naked ambition of the coup. When it finished, Lena turned it off. I'm filing a formal police report for burglary and embezzlement this afternoon, Lena said. And I'm recommending that the board immediately terminate Mark's employment for cause. Henderson, the family attorney, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Mark was staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists. Arthur, Mark whisked. She's twisting it. She's quiet, Mark, Arthur snapped. He looked at Lena with a newfound respect. I think we've heard enough. Diane, please escort Mr. Mills out of the building. Security will meet you in the lobby. As Mark was let out, his golden boy image shattered in front of the people he'd tried to impress. He turned back for one last look. He didn't look at Lena. He looked at me. You're still just a parasite, he spat. Actually, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm the reason he caught the walnut oil on video. If I hadn't been faking it, he wouldn't have had a recording of his own sister's assault to use as leverage. You really should have checked the footage, Mark. The doors closed behind him. The rest of the meeting was a blur of legal jargon and damage control. By noon, Lena had been fully reinstated. The whistleblower report was retracted, and the board had issued a private apology. But as we walked out of the building, I knew the real fight was still ahead. We hadn't heard from Sarah, and we hadn't heard from Petra. The company is safe, Lena said as we reached the sidewalk. But the family, they're gonna come for us now. Properly. Let them come, I said. I've survived a failing heart and a near-deadly poisoning. I think I can handle a few angry relatives. Lena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked at her phone. A new message had just arrived. It was from her mother. We're at the house. Your father and I. We need to talk about what you've done to Mark. Don't be late, Lena looked at me. Do you want to go to the hotel? You don't have to be there for this. Are you kidding? I said, tightening my grip on my bag. I've been the medical baggage for 4 years. I think it's time I became the witness. We drove toward the affluent suburbs where Lena had grown up. The houses here were fortresses of old money and quiet secrets. As we pulled into the long, circular driveway of her parents' estate, I saw Sarah's car parked out front. The battle lines were drawn. And this time, we were walking right into the heart of the enemy camp. The front door was opened by the housekeeper, a woman who looked at Lena with a mixture of pity and fear. We were led into the formal drawing room, a place of stiff velvet chairs and portraits of ancestors who would probably be appalled by the current state of affairs. Lena's parents were sitting on the sofa. Her father, a man who had built the family's original fortune through ruthless real estate deals, looked tired. Her mother, Evelyn, looked like she was carved out of ice. And in the corner, looking pale but triumphant, was Sarah. Sit down, Lena, her father said. He didn't look at me. I'll stand, Lena said. And I'm not here to talk about Mark's unfortunate termination. I'm here to tell you that if any of you contact me or my friend again, the police report I filed this morning won't just stay in the local precinct. It'll go to the federal level. Evelyn stood up, her pearls clicking. How dare you? Mark is your brother. He made a mistake. He stole $500,000, mother, Lena interrupted. And he helped Petra try to frame me for corporate fraud. That's not a mistake. That's a betrayal. And what about Petra? Sarah chimed in, her voice shrill. She's in a hospital bed because of your friend's whatever she has. She almost died. She almost died because she stole a plate of food she knew she was allergic to, I said, stepping forward. She was so desperate to prove I was a liar that she forgot to check the ingredients. That's not on me. That's on her. Sarah turned on me, her eyes flashing with a familiar localized madness. You've been poisoning this family from the start. Ever since Lena found you on that floor, she's been obsessed with you. You're a drain, a distraction, and now you're a liability. She's my best friend, Lena said, her voice rising. And she's the only person in this room who hasn't lied to me, stolen from me, or tried to destroy my life this weekend. Lena, be reasonable, her father said. We can settle this quietly. We'll have Mark pay back the money, slowly, and you'll drop the charges. We'll tell the board it was a misunderstanding. No, Lena said. We won't, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hostile takeover, and you were all in on it. The room went quiet. Lena looked from her mother to her father. I saw the emails, Dad. I saw the encouragement you gave Mark to take the reins. You didn't think a woman could run the company long term, did you? You thought I was too soft, too focused on charity cases. Her father looked away, his silence giving more away than any confession. I'm done, Lena said. I'm selling my shares in the family trust. I'm cutting ties with the estate. And if I see any of you at my office, my home, or my favorite restaurant, I will have you removed by force. She turned to leave but stopped at the door. Oh, and Sarah, tell Petra that the video of her swapping the plates, I didn't just give it to the police. I sent a copy to her law firm's ethics committee. I figured since they value integrity so much, they'd want to see their star associate in action. Sarah let out a choked sound of rage, but Lena was already walking away. As we stepped back out into the cool evening air, the weight that had been sitting on my chest for years finally began to lift. The medical baggage wasn't a burden anymore. It was a shield. It was the thing that had shown us who our real friends were and who the real monsters were. Where to now? I asked as we got back into the Jeep. Lena looked at the house one last time, then shifted into gear. The EpiPen didn't make the situation better in an instant. It just bought her time. Petra's body was a war zone, her airway whistling like a tea kettle while I held her down. Lena was on the phone with the dispatcher, her voice hitting a register I'd never heard, sharp, terrified, and incredibly loud against the sudden silence of the lodge. The private chef was backed into a corner of the kitchen, his hands up as if he were being robbed, his face the color of the flour on his apron. I didn't look at the chef. I didn't look at Lena. I kept my eyes on Petra's pupils. They were pinpricks. I could feel the tremors running through her thighs, the muscles jumping under the fabric of her expensive leggings. She had tried to kill me. Or at least, she had tried to make me suffer enough to admit I was a fraud. Instead, she was the one dying on a heated slate floor in Aspen, while the smell of truffle oil and expensive wine mocked us from the table. When the paramedics finally burst through the heavy oak doors, the cold mountain air they brought with them felt like a slap. They took over with a clinical efficiency that made the room feel even smaller. One of them asked about the medication. I handed him the spent EpiPen, my fingers still shaking. She took a massive hit of walnut oil, I said, my voice cracking. Anaphylaxis started within 60 seconds. They loaded her onto a gurney, her face still a terrifying shade of mottled purple, and wheeled her out into the snow. The silence that followed was heavy. Lena sat down on the floor right where Petra had collapsed. She didn't cry. She just stared at the red NEMA sensor still sitting on the table, its light blinking like a miniature distress signal. She swapped them, Lena whispered. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the air. She actually reached across the table and swapped the plates while I was in the kitchen, grabbing the vintage balsamic. The chef, Marco, finally stepped forward. He looked like he was about to be sick. I followed every protocol. I used the purple cutting board. I opened a fresh bag of flour. I didn't even use the same whisk. It wasn't you, Marco, I said, finally standing up. My legs felt like jelly. She did it to herself. She was trying to catch me in a lie. The next morning, the lodge felt like a funeral home. The sun was blindingly bright against the snow, the kind of perfect Colorado day that usually makes you feel like you're in a commercial. But inside, the air was sour. Lena had spent half the night at the hospital, and the other half on the phone with her aunt. I was in the kitchen making tea, the only thing I trusted myself to consume, when Lena walked in. Her hair was a mess, and she was still wearing the sweater from the night before. She's stable, Lena said, leaning against the island. But my aunt is losing her mind. She's calling lawyers. She's blaming the lodge, the chef, and she's blaming you. Me? I let out a hollow laugh. I saved her life. I used my own emergency medication on her. She's telling people you baited her, Lena said, rubbing her eyes. She's claiming you made such a big deal out of the food that Petra felt pressured to prove it was safe. She's saying the swap was a result of the toxic environment your illness creates. The unfairness of it felt like a physical weight. I'd spent 4 years being the easy friend, the one who brought her own Tupperware to parties, the one who never complained when we had to change restaurants 3 times. I had done everything to minimize my baggage, and now it was being used as the weapon to explain away a woman's attempt to poison me. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her to go to hell, Lena said flatly. But Sarah has a lot of influence in our family's trust, and she's already started a group chat with my parents and my brother. They're talking about the liability of having you around. I felt a cold prickle of dread. Lena's tech company was successful, but a huge chunk of her initial seed funding had come from a family investment vehicle, managed by her father and Aunt Sarah. They weren't just family, they were her board of directors. Lena, if this affects your business, stop, she snapped, then immediately softened. Just stop. This isn't about the business. It's about the fact that my cousin tried to kill you to prove a point. If they want to pull their funding, let them. I'll find new investors before the snow melts. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Over the next 48 hours, the retreat dissolved. The other guests, mostly Lena's college friends and a few high-level employees, left early. The atmosphere had become radioactive. No one knew what to say to the girl who almost got poisoned, or the girl whose cousin was currently in the ICU because of a prank gone wrong. We drove back to Denver in a rental car on Monday. The silence was different now. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of 2 best friends. It was the tense, vibrating silence of 2 people waiting for the other shoe to drop. When I got back to my apartment, there was a man standing in the hallway. He was wearing a cheap suit and holding a clipboard. My heart skipped. I thought maybe it was the police, or maybe Sarah had followed through on her threats. Are you the tenant in 4B, he asked. Yes. Why? I'm with the management company. We received a report of a significant biohazard incident over the weekend, involving specialized medical equipment and potential cross-contamination in the shared ventilation. I stared at him. A biohazard? I was in Aspen. The report was filed by a family member of your cosigner, he said, looking at his notes, and Elizabeth Petra Mills. She claimed that your medical condition requires the use of specialized, unapproved chemical testing agents, and that there was an explosion or leak of testing fluids. The NEMA sensor. The tiny capsules use a small amount of liquid to test for gluten. It's harmless. It's basically a chemistry set for kids. But Petra, or Sarah, had framed it as a hazardous material leak to the building management. That's a lie, I said, my voice trembling. It's a gluten sensor. It's smaller than a deck of cards. Be that as it may, the man said. We have to conduct a full inspection and a deep clean of the unit. Until then, the unit is flagged as uninhabitable. You have 20 minutes to gather essentials. I stood in the hallway, the key cold in my hand. They weren't just coming for Lena's business. They were coming for my home. They were trying to make my life so difficult, so burdened by red tape and medical complications, that I would have no choice but to disappear. I called Lena, but it went straight to voicemail. That was the first time in 4 years she hadn't picked up on the first ring. I went inside, my hands shaking so hard I could barely zip my suitcase. I looked at my kitchen, the separate toaster, the labeled shelves, the sanctuary I had built so I wouldn't have to be afraid of my own dinner. It all felt tainted now. As I walked out with my one suitcase, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Lena. It was an email from the law firm where I worked as a freelance paralegal. Subject: Contract Review Internal Health Policy. Dear Maya, in light of recent disclosures regarding the nature of your autoimmune condition and potential emergency incidents that may occur. On site, the partners have decided to put your current contracts on hold, pending a full medical clearance from a board-certified physician of our choosing. They were cutting me off. Every pillar of my life, my home, my job, my support system, was being kicked out from under me in a coordinated strike. And the worst part? It was all being done under the guise of safety. They were using my own disease as the cage to lock me out of my life. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the engine idling. I had nowhere to go. I tried Lena again, still voicemail. I started driving. I didn't have a plan until I saw the sign for the hospital where Petra was being held. I knew she was still there. She needed 48 hours of observation for a secondary reaction. I parked the car and walked into the lobby. I didn't look like a threat. I looked like a girl who hadn't slept in 3 days, clutching a purse that contained a spent EpiPen and a handful of gluten-free crackers. I found her room on the 4th floor. The door was cracked open. I could hear Aunt Sarah's voice inside, sharp and rhythmic. The building manager said it's done. She's out. And the law firm took the bait. They're terrified of a workplace liability suit. By the time Lena figures out how to help her, there won't be anything left to save. Is Lena still blocked? That was Petra. Her voice was thin, but the spite was as strong as ever. Her father took her phone yesterday during the intervention, Sarah said. They're at the estate in Evergreen. He's telling her it's for her own good, that she's codependent on a sick person. He's going to make her choose the company or the friend. I stood in the hallway, the sterile smell of the hospital filling my lungs. I felt that familiar heat in my gut, not the sharp biting pain of a celiac flare, but a slow bubbling rage. They weren't just bullies. They were architects. They were building a world where I didn't exist, and they were doing it by telling Lena that loving me was a mental illness. I reached into my bag. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan, but I had my phone and it was already recording. I pushed the door open. Sarah turned, her eyes widening behind her designer glasses. Petra flinched, pulling the hospital thin blanket up to her chin. You, Sarah hissed. You have a lot of nerve showing up here. I just wanted to check on the patient, I said, my voice eerily calm. I also wanted to make sure you knew that the building management recorded our conversation. The part where I told them about the hazardous leak being a lie, it's all on camera. It was a bluff, a total desperate bluff, but Sarah's face paled. And the law firm? I continued, stepping into the room. I've already sent them the video from the lodge. The one where Petra admits to swapping the plates. I'm pretty sure attempted poisoning of a coworker is a bigger liability than an autoimmune disease. You don't have that video, Petra croaked. Lena has it, and she's locked away. Lena didn't just have it, I said, lying through my teeth with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. She backed it up to our shared cloud drive. I watched it this morning while I was packing my biohazardous belongings. I walked right up to the edge of Petra's bed. She looked small in the hospital gown, the bravado from the ski lodge stripped away by the IV drips and the monitors. You tried to kill me to prove a point, I whispered, and now your mom is trying to ruin me to cover it up. But here's the thing about people like me. We're used to being in pain. We're used to our bodies trying to kill us every single day. You think a lost apartment and a canceled contract is going to break me? I've survived my own organs shutting down. You're just a girl with a walnut allergy and a mean streak. Sarah stepped forward, her hand raised as if to push me out. Get out of here. I'm calling security. Call them, I said, holding up my phone. I'm still recording. Say something else about the intervention you staged for Lena. Tell me more about how her father took her phone. I'm sure the board of directors would love to hear how the family is managing the CEO's personal communications. Sarah froze. The board was her weak point. If the investors thought the family was interfering with the company's leadership, the stock would tank. What do you want? Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I want Lena's phone back in her hand, I said. I want the biohazard report retracted in the next hour. And I want Petra to tell the truth to the law firm. And if we don't, Petra asked, then I don't just go to the police, I said. I go to the press. Tech Hyrus attempts to poison disabled best friend at $4,000 a night resort. It's a hell of a headline, Petra. It'll follow you a lot longer than that walnut oil will. I walked out of the room before they could answer. My heart was thundering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I made it to the elevator before my knees gave out, and I had to lean against the cold metal wall to keep from collapsing. I sat in my car and waited. 10 minutes, 20. At 35 minutes, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lena. I'm out. I'm at the gas station on Highway 74. I have the car. Meet me there. Don't go back to the apartment. I didn't ask questions. I drove. When I pulled into the gas station, I saw Lena's SUV parked by the air pumps. She was standing outside, pacing, looking at her phone like it was a foreign object. When she saw my car, she ran over. I barely had the door open before she was pulling me into a hug so tight I could feel her heart racing against mine. They took it, she sobbed into my shoulder. My own father. He sat me down and told me I was losing my mind because of you. He had a psychiatrist there, Maya. A private one. They were going to try to put me on a 72-hour hold for evaluation. How did you get away? I asked, pulling back to look at her. My brother, she said, wiping her eyes. Mark. He's a jerk, and he hates the drama. But he drew the line at the psych hold. He slipped me the keys to the back door and my phone while my dad was arguing with Sarah in the kitchen. Sarah was there? On speaker, Lena said. She was screaming about some video. She said you went to the hospital and threatened her. I did, I said. I told them I had the video of the swap. Lena looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. But Maya, I don't have the video. My dad deleted it off my phone before I could back it up. That was the first thing he did. The blood drained from my face. My only leverage was gone. I had played a high-stakes hand with nothing but air, and Sarah was going to figure that out the second she talked to her brother. He deleted it? I whispered. Everything, Lena said. The photos, the video from the lodge. It's all gone. He said he was protecting the family from a scandal. We stood there in the gravel of the gas station, the wind whipping around us. We were two women with no home, a crumbling business, and a family that was willing to use the legal system to erase us. We still have the NEMA sensor, I said, trying to find a foothold. The capsule. It's still in my bag. It has the contaminated sample inside. It's not enough, Lena said. It's just a piece of plastic with a red light. Without the video of her actually swapping swapping the plates? It's your word against the entire Mills family, and they have a lot more money for lawyers than we do. She looked at her phone. My dad just messaged. He's reporting the car is stolen. We need to go, I said. Now. It was faster and had more gas. We left my car in the back of the lot. As we pulled onto the highway, heading north toward the mountains, Lena's phone started blowing up. Emails, texts, alerts. What is it? I asked. She opened an email from her CO. Her face went gray. The board, she said. They just called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Sarah leaked a story to a tech blog. It's already live. She handed me the phone. The headline was a knife to the gut. Health or hype. Internal struggles at Lena's tech startup over CEO's alleged personal crisis and codependent relationship. The article didn't mention celiac. It didn't mention the poisoning. It used words like unstable, erratic, and medical obsession. It painted a picture of a brilliant CEO who had lost her grip on reality because of a troubled friend. They're not trying to cover it up anymore, Lena said, her voice shaking. They're trying to destroy me so they can take over the company. If I'm unstable, they can trigger the incapacity clause in my contract. We need the video, Lena, I said. There has to be a way to get it back. It's gone, Maya. He wiped the phone and the cloud account. I looked at the passing trees, my mind racing through every paralegal seminar I'd ever sat through. Evidence doesn't just disappear, the chef, I said suddenly. Marco, he had a GoPro. Lena looked at me. What? In the kitchen at the lodge. He was filming his private chef experience for his Instagram. I saw the mount on the counter. It was pointed right at the pass, the area where the plates sit before they go to the table. Lena's grip on the steering wheel tightened. If he caught the swap, he's terrified of being sued, Lena. He's not going to just give it to us. Especially if your aunt's lawyers have already been in his ear. We don't need him to give it to us, Lena said, a dark, desperate look entering her eyes. We just need to get to him before they do. She pushed the accelerator down. We weren't heading for a hotel. We were heading back toward the mountains, back toward the man who held the only proof that we weren't the crazy ones. But as we hit the foothills, a black sedan pulled out of a side road behind us. It didn't pass. It stayed exactly 3 car lengths back, matching our speed. Lena, I said, my voice low. Don't look now, but I think your dad's security found us. She didn't look. She just turned up the radio and kept driving. Let them follow, she said. I'm done running. We reached the outskirts of Boulder an hour later. Marco's catering kitchen was in a small industrial park. It was late, but the lights were on. We pulled in, the black sedan stopping at the entrance of the park. They were watching, but they weren't moving yet. We hopped out and ran toward the door. It was locked. Lena pounded on the glass. Marco, open up! It's Lena! After a minute, the door opened a crack. Marco looked terrified. He had a black eye and his lip was split. You can't be here, he whispered. They came this morning. They took everything. Who, Marco? Who took it? I asked. The men in the suits, he said, his voice trembling. They said there was a litigation hold. They took my cameras, my hard drives, everything. They said if I talked to you, they'd make sure I never worked in this state again. Did they take the GoPro? I asked. Marco looked at me, his eyes darting to the black sedan at the gate. They took the one on the counter, he said. But I have 2. I always run a backup from the ceiling mount for the wide shots. They didn't see it. It's small, tucked behind the vent hood. Do you have the footage? Lena asked, her voice breathless. I have the card, Marco said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a tiny micro SD card. But you didn't get it from me. I was never here. I'm leaving for California tonight. He handed the card to Lena. As her fingers closed around it, the black sedan at the gate started to move. Go, Marco yelled, slamming the door. We ran for the SUV. The sedan was accelerating, the headlights cutting through the dark. Get in, Lena screamed. We scrambled inside just as the sedan blocked the exit of the parking lot. 2 men got out. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were wearing the same expensive suits I'd seen in the lobby of Lena's office. One of them walked up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass with a heavy ring. Lena, he said, his voice muffled by the glass. Your father wants you to come home. Don't make this a police matter. Lena didn't roll down the window. She looked at me, then at the tiny memory card in her hand. Maya, she said, her voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. Hand me your phone. Why? Because my phone is being tracked, she said. Yours isn't. Not yet. I handed it to her. She slotted the card into a portable reader she kept in her bag and plugged it into my phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. What are you doing? I asked. I'm starting a live stream, she said, to the company's internal Slack channel, all 500 employees, and the tech blog that ran the story. The man outside tapped harder on the glass. Lena, last warning. She hit a button on the screen. Hello, everyone, Lena said, her voice booming through the car's speakers as the live stream went live. This is Lena Mills. I've heard the rumors about my instability. I think it's time you saw the truth about what happened in Aspen. She held the phone up to the window. On the screen, the footage from the wide-angle GoPro began to play. It was crystal clear. You could see the dining table. You could see me sitting there, talking to the chef, and you could see Petra. In the video, Petra looks around, waits for Lena to exit to the kitchen, and with a swift, practiced motion, slides my plate toward her and replaces it with her own. She even smirks at the camera. The one she didn't know was there. The man outside saw the screen. He stopped tapping. He reached for his radio. It's too late, Lena shouted through the glass. It's already live. 5,000 people are watching your litigation hold go up in flames. The man looked at his partner. They didn't wait. They got back in the sedan and reversed out of the lot at high speed. They knew when the game was up. Lena dropped the phone into her lap and started to shake. The adrenaline was leaving her, replaced by a cold, hollow exhaustion. We got it, I whispered. We got it, she repeated. But as we sat there in the dark, the live stream still running, a new notification popped up on the screen. It was a news alert. Bricking. Major fire reported at residence of tech mogul in Evergreen. Authorities investigating potential foul play Lena's parents' house. She stared at the screen, her face turning a ghostly white. My dad, she whispered. He was still there. He and Mark were arguing when I left. She looked at me, the victory in her eyes replaced by a new jagged terror. They're going to say we did it, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They're going to say we set the fire before we ran. Lena didn't say anything. She just put the car in gear and started driving, not toward the mountains, and not toward the fire. She drove straight to the nearest police station. We're going to tell them everything, she said, starting with the walnut oil. As we walked into the station, kitchen, the fluorescent lights felt like an interrogation. I gripped my bag, the NEMA sensor still inside. A small red-lighted witness to a story that was no longer about a birthday trip. It was about survival. And the fire was only just beginning. The ambulance lights were still swirling against the white snow of the Aspen night when the silence of the lodge finally broke. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was the sound of the private chef Marco dropping a metal tray in the kitchen. The clang echoed through the open floor plan, sharp and final. Lena didn't move from her spot on the floor. She just stared at the empty space where the gurney had been, her chest heaving as she tried to process that her own blood had just tried to kill her best friend and ended up nearly dead herself. I sat down next to her, the adrenaline leaving my system in a cold, nauseating wave. My hand was still cramped from the grip I'd kept on the EpiPen. Neither of us said anything for a long time. We just sat on that $4,500 a night floor, surrounded by the smell of expensive truffle oil and the lingering scent of ozone and hospital-grade epinephrine. The cleanup was quiet. Marco wouldn't look at us. He packed his knives in a panicked blur, muttering about liability waivers and insurance. Lena didn't even try to stop him. She just wrote him a check for triple his fee, told him to keep the rest as hush money for the sake of his own career, and watched him vanish into the night. By Sunday morning, the lodge was empty. The other guests had filtered out at dawn, too uncomfortable to stay in a house where a prank had turned into a near casualty. Lena and I were the last ones left. She spent 3 hours on the phone with the hospital. Petra was stable, but the family was already circling the wagons. Aunt Sarah had called Lena 4 times, not to thank me for saving her daughter's life, but to scream about how my dramatic medical needs had created a high-stress environment that caused Petra to act out. She's calling it a lapse in judgment brought on by my toxic friendship with you, Lena said, her voice sounding like gravel as we loaded the rental car. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and hard. She told my father that if I don't distance myself from you, she's going to file a civil suit against the catering company and name you as a co-conspirator for baiting her daughter. The absurdity of it should have been funny. I was the one who almost ended up in the ICU. I was the one whose food was tampered with. But in the world of the ultra-wealthy, the truth is often less important than the narrative. And the narrative they wanted was that I was a liability. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice small. Lena didn't answer until we were halfway down the mountain, the jagged peaks of the Rockies disappearing in the rearview mirror. She pulled the car over at a scenic overlook, the air crisp and thin. She reached into her bag and pulled out the NEMA sensor. The red light was gone, the battery dead, but the capsule with the tainted sample was still locked inside. I'm not going to distance myself, she said. I'm going to do the opposite. When we got back to Seattle, the fallout was swift. Aunt Sarah tried to freeze Lena out of the family's investment meetings. My law firm received an anonymous tip that my medical condition made me a workplace hazard. For a week, it felt like the world was shrinking. But Sarah had underestimated 2 things: Lena's proprietary control over her own tech company, and my habit of documenting everything. I didn't sue for the attempted poisoning. I didn't go to the police. Instead, Lena called a family meeting at her parents' house. She didn't invite Petra, but she made sure Sarah was there. I sat in the corner of that pristine, white-carpeted living room, feeling like a ghost in a museum. Lena didn't lead with anger. She led with a spreadsheet. She showed them exactly how much money Petra had cost the family in potential legal fees if Marco decided to sue. She showed them the cost of the medical flight, the lodge, and the damage to the family's reputation if the story of a high society poisoning hit the local rags. And here, Lena said, sliding a tablet across the coffee table toward her father, is the footage from the lodge's internal security camera. I bought the digital rights from the owner this morning. The video was silent but clear. It showed Petra leaning over my plate. It showed her smirk. It showed her intentionally swapping the garnish to make sure I wouldn't notice the difference. It showed her recording me with her phone, waiting for me to fail. Sarah's face went from indignant red to a sickly, pale gray. Maya saved her life, Lena said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. And in return, you tried to take her job and her reputation. That ends today. If I hear one more word about Maya being a liability, this video goes to the board of directors. And then it goes to the DA. The silence in the room was absolute. My heart was thumping, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer, grounded reality of being seen. We walked out of that house and didn't look back. The milestone birthday hadn't been the celebration Lena had planned, but it was the one we needed. A month later, we were back in our apartment, the kitchen finally restored to its safe, sterile glory. Lena had hired a new legal team for her company and brought me on as a full-time consultant for their accessibility and health compliance wing. Petra had been sent to a wellness retreat in Sedona, the family's polite way of saying she was in social exile. I was sitting at the island, eating a bowl of certified gluten-free pasta, watching the rain hit the Seattle windows. Lena walked in, dropped her keys, and sighed, leaning against the counter. You okay? I asked. She looked at me, then at the kitchen, then back at me. She reached out and took a bite of my pasta. The same bowl, the same fork, knowing it was safe because she had helped me make it. I'm better than okay, she said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through. I'm finally out of the woods. I realized then that she wasn't just talking about the mountain. We were both finally in a place where we didn't have to prove we were hurting to be believed. We just had to be there. And for us, that was more than enough.